3 minutes after 8 o'clock. Thank you so much for agreeing to stay with us here on the AM Report. It's great to be in your company. I'm Ayanda Nyati. So the Advertising Regulatory Board has approved a Diesel Jean Billboard campaign that depicts 8 couples kissing. That advert is called When Together and seeks to emphasize the importance of human connection after being deprived of contact because of things like the coronavirus pandemic. The approval came after complaints by 2 consumers that the billboards were sexually charged and harmful towards children. Now, while the African Christian Democratic Party says the campaign will worsen society's moral decay, the advertising watchdog says there's little potential harm because the advert will only run for about 6 weeks. So we're asking, what could be the impact of such a campaign, especially on children? Let's unpack this for you, bring in our guests. We're joined now by psychologist Benedict Mahlangu. Also joining our conversation is ACDP MP Murray Suka. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time. It's great to have you on the AM Report. Murray, if I can begin with you, we're certainly getting the impression that the ACDP isn't impressed. If that's accurate, tell us why.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having us on. Firstly, the context in which this advertisement is being displayed is very important, the context within South Africa. We are faced in a country where it is the most dangerous place for women and children to live in. And the scale of sexual abuse among children, especially in vulnerable communities, has not even been determined, but we know that it is prevalent. So when you look within the context of this advertisement, it is very important that you understand the context in which you bring imagery like this in and what triggers, and we should mention that, what it triggers for people that are exposed, say, to abuse or sexual abuse or that are being exploited in any way. For instance, in one of the images where you see an older man and a younger woman. So the context, first of all, is very important. Then secondly, it is also very concerning that we reduce human contact and intimacy to sex. To say, like the watchdog, the ARB has said, to say that it is only kissing would be, it would not be accurate. All the couples in the billboard or in the advertisement is in very sexually intimate positions that suggest much more than sex. So the ACDP, from a moral and ethical standpoint, say that number one, you need to understand the context in which you do your advertisement, and there is a responsibility, a social responsibility that you need to adhere to, and that you need to be sensitive to, especially given our context. And then secondly, you need to understand that there are many trigger points for people that gets exposed, and especially children. You cannot unsee what you've seen. So it is within that context that the ACDP is saying the ARB has let down the consumer, and the advertiser of these jeans has used cheap publicity, really, to sell jeans without taking, without taking in the wider context in which it is marketing its products.
Right. We'll unpack the psychological ramifications, considerations in just a moment. But first, Mary, if I can stay with you, many people will push back and say this ad is not the sum total of the human interaction that can take place in a context like South Africa, and doesn't even purport to try do that, doesn't purport to try represent all kinds of human interaction that can take place.
It is, for me, there is so much you could have done with the advert, first of all. And for why I say it is cheap publicity, really, is because it seeks for cheap publicity, it seeks for provocation, and it is commercialized. It is really the commercial interest of the company versus what is in the best interest of our wider society. And I'll back that up by saying, we're in a pandemic where people died alone in hospitals. Many families have not had the opportunity to say goodbye even to their families. And so you had people who died without anybody holding their hand. And when you are opting as a global brand to then reduce intimacy to sexuality, basically, and you do not even, within the context of what we are going through right now, assume a higher responsibility to convey through messaging the very things like the touch of a grandmother or the touch of a grandfather or a newborn baby that has never met a grandmother. It is lazy intellectualism, lazy imagination that just goes for what sells. And again, it is about sex sells. And so what do we go to? We go to for what is the most, what we assume as companies is going to give us the most bang for our buck. They didn't even try to do a consumer research, even though the ARB have said that the impact needs to be researched. And the ARB didn't bother to hold these people to standard by saying that, it can be potentially harmful for children, but they did not, apply themselves as a watchdog. So who do they look after?
Got you.
Yeah.
Your stance is well captured. I wonder if Diesel actually doesn't mind your scathing retort and what that would mean. But Benedict, let's bring you in. The real consideration, call it the epicenter of the contention, is around the impact this will have on the psychology of children. But let's be frank, dare I say, if children don't see this kind of stuff in an ad, they're likely to see it elsewhere.
I mean, you're right, and Murray is touching on a very important concept. But according to us psychologists and what we actually see in terms of the impact is what we call the early sexualization that is actually being displayed. So you must also understand that there's danger in terms of visual perceptions. What I see is more dangerous than what I can hear. Because you must also understand that it's actually left out there in the media or out there in the community. So if a child can actually see such and consume such, there's no sort of leniency or supervision to then actually provide further impact or further association to what it actually means. So there is earlier that. So the dangers in that can create a low self-esteem, to create self-esteem in terms of actually the self-concept and how they later then come to understand itself. And more so, I think the ads are very touching on of further conforming in terms of what is heteronormative and what is actually accepted in society as well. So there's a lot of misconceptions that are actually picked up in terms of what and how it can also affect the younger ones as well.
Yeah. I wonder, though, Benedict, whether we're not bestowing a whole lot more responsibility on advertising companies than we need to. Things around the moral fiber of a society must surely begin, some would argue, in places like the home, such that when a child sees an ad like this, they'll be able to know the kind of processing that needs to take place and where to go to if they're still trying to make sense of other aspects that their minds can't grasp yet.
No, you're right. It's not like, and we're not saying that we leave all responsibility into marketing agency companies, but we're also ensuring them and actually reminding them they also have this particular social responsibility that they need to actually then, adhere to. But what I'm picking up is also another genetic fallacy in terms of how they're advertising. Whether they're advertising from the other imagery that, for instance, there was an older man and a young woman, that can trigger some sexual traumas as well. That can also, because it's also unsupervised. That's my main major argument here, that it's actually happening unsupervised. And the more we get people speaking about certain thing in the society, the more, money we get, the more publicity we get. But there is a moral compass in terms of actual responsibility in the organizations as well as in the communities that we operate within. So imagery is very dangerous because it's left unsupervised.
I mean, the other consideration to be made, and perhaps this is a wider industry conversation about, in our industry we say if it bleeds, it leads. I think the counterpart for advertising is sex sells. If there's some kind of sexual innuendo, it's likely to go far enough. Benedict, before I go to Murray very quickly, psychologically speaking, have we been able to quantify whether that's even where children reckon with their sexuality, from things like ads, or is it elsewhere?
No, we definitely have gotten to a point where that's exactly it. Because remember, in terms of individualization, in terms of coming out, in terms of them being very much assertive, especially in the adolescent phase or stage of development, it's all what they consume that actually later then develops their own identity. So you can imagine as a young man or a young girl growing up in the streets wherever, urban or peri-urban, and then I'm actually consuming such. That is also leaving me in terms of care and in your Instagrams and in your Facebook. This is all that I really or so often see. So therefore, this is exactly how I should then actually ascribe to or associate to. So you can imagine now we have a society where sex sells a lot. So it's important to then actually ramifications in terms of actually not wanting to do such or exposing them to such, but how then do we then prevent from such? Speaking to the marketing agencies, just let them know, listen, they also have a social responsibility. I mean, it takes a village to actually grow a child, so they also part of this village as well.
Murray, I can imagine some of Diesel's backers saying, look, because of what Diesel did, now we're having an in-depth conversation about how we actually reckon with our sexuality and where children fall in that spectrum. Diesel did a good thing.
No, Diesel did a cheap thing. Diesel did what they think sells, and they, for me, the issue of social responsibility is a big thing. The issue of, and what so well was articulated by Benedict, is the impact of this on children and what is acceptable within society, that we are, what we are normalizing. So I would say Diesel failed, and the ARB, in fact, to hold Diesel to this, to actually conduct a consumer research study to see the impact of it. And I feel it's the dereliction of duty. It's who are they in service to? And this is the thing with self-appointed watchdogs. It is the commercial aspect of it that is more important than the social impact of it on especially the vulnerable, where it is children. And no, we don't need Diesel to lead us into conversations around sexuality by taking explicit billboards and putting it out on our highways. We certainly don't. The issue of parental control, as brought out by Benedict, is very important. We cannot expose our children. Like I say, you can't unsee what you've seen. And children should not be taught about sexuality by billboards or advertising agencies who want to sell jeans. The parents' role is that. And when you are going to have it on a highway like Johannesburg, for instance, and you are sitting for a few hours there at a snail pace in traffic, my child having to look at a billboard and now that shows intimacy as sexual sex as the ultimate intimacy it's problematic.
Yeah.
And I don't need an advertising agency to come and bring the conversation into the social sphere, because if sexuality and values cannot be separated.
Absolutely. Well, look, I'll tell you what stands out for me as being quite interesting. There was widespread outrage when there were issues around racism to do with what I think was a clicks ad. I haven't heard much about the backlash to this particular ad. And I don't say that takes away from the legitimacy of the point being made, but it does force one to reflect about the kind of society we might be in and what people are and not willing to consume. Thanks very much indeed for your guys' time. Really appreciate it. I hope the conversation continues in some respect. Benedict Mhlongo is a psychologist. Also joining us there was Murray Sukkers, who's a MP, Member of Parliament with the ACDP. Once again, to both of you, thanks very much indeed.